Well, let's have more on all the takeaways from the two debates with Steve Chuggaris, who joins me now in studio. Steve is a journalist and political commentator. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So as we look over these last 2 days, who do you think seemed to fare the best and why?
Well, it's interesting. So they split up over 2 nights, and they broke them up based on polling and then random choice. Elizabeth Warren was really the highest polling person on the first night of the debate, and I think she really sort of had it to herself, at least the beginning of the debate, really allowed her to establish or reestablish herself in this giant field of Democratic candidates. I mean, there are 24 candidates, 20 of whom debated this week. And on Thursday night, I think it was obvious, as you saw in that story, that Kamala Harris, a senator from California, had that moment with Joe Biden. She had a big announcement earlier this year in Oakland with a huge crowd, and then she sort of disappeared. And her numbers sort of flatlined in terms of the polling. But I think this reestablished her as a major contender, as a top-tier person. I think you're going to see and hear a lot of her over the next coming weeks before the next debate.
And as you mentioned, this is a huge group. So as we try and narrow down some of the common themes, what are the economic priorities that came up the most over the 2 days?
You know, it's interesting. So, there are, again, 24 candidates that are, it's like an arms race in terms of proposals, whether it's economic related or other issues, and they're all trying to outdo each other to try to get a slice of these Democratic voters. Healthcare is by far the biggest issue. You mentioned the Medicare for All proposal. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are basically on the same page on that, which is they want fully funded government healthcare, single payer, government pays for everything, no more private insurance. Polling doesn't suggest that that's the most popular answer in terms of how to deal with healthcare, and you're seeing other candidates say, okay, we slow down on that. Maybe we can offer public option, which would give people an opportunity to buy into Medicare. And some are saying, perhaps let's just improve on the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. And so it's running the gamut. But the question is how to pay for all of this.
And that's actually my next point. You mentioned some of them said it should be government funded. What were some of the other plans that people had to really fund some of these ambitious changes that they want to make?
Well, it's interesting. Nobody wants to talk about taxes in terms of raising taxes, but Bernie Sanders was asked that question specifically in the debate on Thursday night. Would you have to raise taxes on the middle class to pay for a lot of these ideas that you have? And after dodging the question a couple of times, he finally was pinned down on it and said, yes, middle class taxes will go up, or middle class will pay more. However, they'll pay less in health care. But he admitted to raising taxes on the middle class, which is not a political argument you ever really want to get on the record, but Bernie Sanders was there on Thursday.
And of course, helping the middle class, obviously an issue that keeps coming up, universal health care, tuition-free college also came up, climate change deterrence. How are other countries handling these same issues? There's a lot of accusations about sort of the doom of America if we go this route, but how are other countries handling these issues?
Well, healthcare specifically, the candidates point to Canada, they point to Britain, they point to Denmark, and they say, hey, they've got universal healthcare, but they have different degrees of universal health care. I mean, Canada does not have a system in which everything gets paid for. In fact, a lot of Canadians have to have supplemental insurance to pay for the things that the government health care doesn't cover, and so it doesn't cost as much. As one of the candidates, I think it was Senator Bennett, said last night, there's also 35 million people in Canada. There's 350 million people in this country. And so the question is, what do you want the government to pay for in terms of health care, and how that's going to dictate how much it costs. Do you want long-term care covered? Do you want mental health? Do you want dental? Do you want vision? Do you want your prescription drugs? If all that's covered, that's going to cost trillions and trillions of dollars over the course of the next 10, 20 years. And how do you pay for that? Well, the answer is raising taxes. Bernie Sanders wants to raise taxes on the wealthiest folks, and he thinks that's going to pay for all of this.
Now, something else that came up quite a few times was China, and a lot of candidates say they do want to manage that relationship, not necessarily through a trade war as their best way. What did we hear about how they do plan to manage that relationship?
Well, what struck me the most about China is really it wasn't talked about as much as perhaps it should have. With the president over in that part of the world dealing with President Xi, you think it would have come up more. It didn't really come up Wednesday. It came up a little bit on Thursday. And what you're hearing is generally they don't like the idea that President Trump's tariffs. They think he's mishandling the relationship. And other than that, it's sort of vague discussion about China is not that great in terms of competition with the United States. You had, I think, Pete Buttigieg, who was really the most detailed on it, saying China is a huge threat to the United States, and we need to focus on it, and tariffs aren't the answer.
Well, certainly a field this big, I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about this as they continue to hit the campaign trail. Thank you so much for joining us, journalist and political commentator Steve Chuggaris.